Women in the villages, they worry about where is my next meal gonna come from. But women in Senton, they worry about who is your family psychologist. I once saw this girl and she said to me, my mom said no dating, but my auntie said this is the right time to start dating. But the same aunt, she told her daughter, no dating. I remember talking to this other old lady and she said, no, this thing used to happen. Old men used to touch inappropriately young girls. And in our culture, they will say, "Ludafora," like, I don't know in other cultures what. So they will put their hands there and go like, it's well what and all that. In a
wrong.
way, it was never seen as something wrong. There's a very sad story that happened to this girl. She was gang raped. So I think there were 5 boys. The 4 raped her. Then this last one said, it doesn't feel right. I cannot. And they say, you're going to do it because if you don't, you're going to turn us in the police. You're going to be a state witness and we don't want that. It's either we kill the girl or we kill you. You know, like old men touching the private parts of young girls. It was like, you see young girls on a queue to go for the old men to touch and sniff. This one is ready. And at that time, we didn't know there are pedophilias out there. People are interested in young children. And when they say this one is ready, we don't know what they're saying. And eventually, that's why they say many girls were molested by older men in the past. And it was never seen as anything wrong at the time.
Good morning, Zanzi, and welcome back to the Social Justice Lab, where it may seem like it's about a lot of things, but we assure you, it's just society. Today, we're graced by the presence of Dr. Mpho Ramarumo. Dr. Mpho is a clinical psychologist who has worked in the public, private sector and academia. Dr. Ramarumo was a lecturer at Univen and now is at UFS since 2023. She obtained her PhD in psychology at the University of Venda. Her research interests include trauma, substance abuse, and psycholegal work. She now lectures social psychology and community psychology at the University of the Free State. Welcome to the Social Justice Lab, Dr. Ramarumo.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Ramarumo, we're just gonna jump right in. In your 2013 paper on adolescent sexuality and culture, you highlight that the decline in traditional authority has had several consequences for young people when it comes to their sexuality. Please highlight some of those consequences.
If you look at it from the traditional perspective, there were measures in place that made it not so easy for young people to engage in sexual activities. But as we look now, I think because of urbanization and moving into urban areas, and you see those structures are no longer there. When I did the research, I did it among the Bavenda-speaking people. We had the different traditional schools where they will teach you about sexuality, what are things that you can do, what are things that you cannot do. And as we look at it now, those cultural schools are declining. So it now is the responsibility now of social media, of friends, and maybe TV, to teach young people about sexuality. And I think that's where the decline in those cultural schools, we see the disappointment that the declining or the disappearance of those social schools is bringing to us and to our youth today. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, in the paper, you sort of highlighted that the parents are reluctant to discuss sexuality, which again covers this point that you mentioned of then the de facto sexual educators or educators of sex are social media and peer groups, right?
Yes.
Where do you think the reluctance to talk about sex comes from on the part of parents?
From that research, the findings indicated that most of the mothers were not prepared, because as the study was conducted among the mothers, they were saying they were not prepared, or they were ill prepared to talk about sexuality with their own children, basically because most of them were nobody talked to them about it. So they didn't know what to cover if they were to talk about sexuality with their own children. Some were saying they would prefer that somebody else does it, maybe the pastor's wife if they go to church, or the aunties if they have aunties in the house. And some people would even say that they would go to an extent of asking somebody to say, can you talk to my daughter about this? So the reluctance is lack of knowledge, was lack of knowledge and ill preparedness of mothers to talk about this, and also not knowing what will I say to my child. I don't want it to look like I'm saying go do it, and I don't want it to look like I'm saying don't do it. And it was I think also a misunderstanding of the concepts. When we talk about sexuality, is all inclusive. It's not only about sex, but many people, when you say sexuality, talk with your child, they think, okay, you need to talk about sex. It's about growing up. It's about talking about them. If it's a girl child, you're talking about menstruation. You're talking about relationships. You're talking about sex itself, and child and pregnancy prevention and disease prevention. So it's all inclusive. But because of lack of knowledge, most of them, they didn't know what are we going to say to our children.
In your estimation, right, how does this fragmented sex education on sexuality have a long-term influence on an individual's conceptualization of sexuality?
When I got interested in doing that study, it was influenced by my own experience. When I became of age, my mom couldn't talk to me about simple things like menstruation. She asked my sister-in-law to be the one to talk to me about it. And my sister-in-law was doing grade 12. She went back to school and did grade 12 at that time. I'm thinking she probably was around 20, early 20s. And when I went to university, and I learned quite a lot of things that I should have known when I was at that age, I felt it was not justice was not done to me, because my sister-in-law just told me, don't play with boys. And it was literally that, don't play with boys when we're like this. And I'm like, my friends are boys. So when you say don't play with boys, you're saying what? I mustn't have friends with boys or what? It was not even clear. It was, now that you are menstruating, you cannot have sex with boys because it's going to lead into pregnancy and stuff. Luckily, I did not have any teenage pregnancy experiences. But when I look at my friends and people that I grew up with, most of them, they had children when we were in grade 8, some when we were in grade 9, some when we were in grade 10. And when I was doing my master's, I realized it's because of lack of information. And we're quick to blame them that why did they become pregnant at an early age? And, you know, my aunt told me she had a child very, very early in life as well. She said she didn't know. So she had this person, they engaged in sexual activities. And when this guy left, because he was working in Joburg, he said, you won't see your menstruation. I've taken them with me. And she didn't know, how does he take those things? And at the end of the month, really, she missed her periods. And she didn't know she was pregnant. So the tummy is growing, and her mother told her there's a baby inside, the baby will come out. And she said, I looked everywhere to see where's the door, where's the baby going to come out through. And there was no way that the baby was going to come out through my mouth or anyway. And it was painful that even now we still have girls who get pregnant because they don't know. They don't have enough information to make a decision whether to engage in sexual activities or not only for pregnancy problems, but also for diseases and all kinds of complications that sexual relationships bring with, especially if you are still young.
It seems like the taboo, making sexuality taboo, which is something that is prevalent in African culture, which again speaks to some of the weaknesses of the purely traditional ways of restriction and testing and whatnot, where some of the sexual practices come into question now with modern legal frameworks and everything. I think what you're highlighting there is a need to modernize traditional ways, not do away with traditional ways totally,
Completely,
but
yeah.
also not fall victim to the hypersexuality that's conveyed in our media these days. And where do you think that conversation would take place ideally?
I'm a family person. I believe that if we can start it at home, before social media, before friends, and before anybody else outside home, if your child hear it from you as a parent, it sticks than if they hear it for the first time from friends. So I think the balance comes with parents first of all, need to be prepared to do it. They need to be willing to be the ones who say, I talk to my child myself. I think the other thing is it helps you with, what you've told your child. Unlike if you send somebody else to talk to your child on your behalf, you don't know what they would say. I once saw this girl and she said to me, my mom said no dating, but my auntie said, you must start now because you are at university, this is the right time to start dating. But the same aunt, she told her daughter, no dating. You understand? So these two cousins meet and they're talking about it. What did your mom say? My mom says no dating, but your mom said it's the right time to start dating. But the same girl says, but the same mother who said to you that it's time to start dating, she told me no dating. You understand? So if you take it as your responsibility as a parent to be the one to talk to your child about it, the information that you've given them is the correct information that you want them to have. So as a parent, you need to also balance the traditional or cultural ways of thinking and also with the current democratic way of thinking when you talk to your child about it. And yes, it's a whole thing that we can talk about the other day, not today, but just to touch base on it, that there are religious issues involved here, there are cultural issues involved, and also we understand that we can control it to a certain level. So there's also democracy issues involved. So as a parent, you need to be able to balance all those things for you to be able to give your child information that will help them to make decisions going forward in life.
So basically what you're saying is if you don't take charge, someone else will, and with questionable intentions. I'll leave it up to the audience to decide what the aunt was trying to do there.
The audience can make decisions for themselves, yes. And also at times it's when we entrust other people with that responsibility. Say it's me and my sister say, talk to my child about it. I will be careful, tread carefully, because I know I don't have authority to tell them, don't do this. So you want to give them both sides of the story, of the coin, and say, make your own decision. Because I am not the mother. I cannot be saying with determination, don't do this. But when I talk to my child, I don't have any restrictions. I tell them straight, this is what you must do, this is what you must not do. So sometimes you might think maybe it's ill intentions. It could also be because they were trading carefully.
Yeah. In your 2014 paper on trauma in context, you mentioned that participants in the Vembe district see trauma as not just an emotional strain, but a financial burden. Please, this is the Social Justice Lab, and we are very interested in issues that affect society and the socio-economic stance of communities within South Africa. Yeah. So please shed light on the interplay between trauma, poverty, and access to resources.
Back in 2014, when we did that study, we needed to find out how people view trauma, how they experience trauma, and the interpretation of trauma. And you're thinking from a psychological point of view of the Western psychology, trauma is any event that can happen out of the blue that will make you feel anxious and that is too much to handle at that time. So you will have different reactions to that situation. Say you're walking out and you just see a car getting involved in an accident. Your reaction to it's what we call trauma. And so you find somebody who is hungry, who is poor, and they see these things that we call trauma as not an emotional thing. They don't attach their emotions because they're basic needs that needs to be met before we entertain the emotions. And I remember the joke that I had some few years ago. Somebody said, women in the villages, they worry about where is my next meal gonna come from. But women in Sandton, they worry about who is your family psychologist. Because our interest, our focus is on different things. So people in urban areas, they have met all the basic needs at that point. So they now have time enough to focus on their emotions. But if I'm here in the rural areas and I'm hungry, I'm poor, you're talking to me about emotions, it's luxury, because at that point I need to know where my next meal is gonna come from. I was talking to my honors students early this year. We were talking about African psychology. And I said to them, as psychologists, we're trained from a Western perspective. When a child in the family is molested, maybe by an adult person or an uncle or grandfather or somebody in the village, we are quick to say we want to report this because, okay, the healthcare profession, the health professional council requires that we report that. If I get to know such kind of information, I have a responsibility to report that. But then you are from an African family or perspective, and these people are worried about relationships. They're worried about what will people think of us if we were to get our uncle or our brother or father arrested for sexual molestation. Is it the most primary thing to get them arrested if they've done something like that? Because we're thinking the trauma that it has caused to this child. At least if we're seeking justice for this child, the person who has done that must be put behind bars. But in the typical African family, it's more than just that. You understand? So that's why I'm saying what we found out in that study is instead of worrying about the emotional impact that trauma caused, they will look at the poverty and financial resources or socioeconomic resources. Instead of looking at it from a psychological point of view, they're looking at it from all other angles. And probably psychology would never find a space in that. I remember talking to this other old lady, and she said, no, this thing used to happen. Old men used to touch inappropriately young girls. And in our culture, they will say, no, dafora, like, I don't know in other cultures what. So they will put their hands there and go like, it's well what and all that.
Nothing
in
is
a
wrong.
way, it was never seen as something wrong. Like old men touching the private parts of young girls. It was like you see young girls on a queue to go for the old men to touch and sniff and this one is ready. And at that time we didn't know there are pedophilias out there. People are interested in young children, and when they say this one is ready, we don't know what they're saying. And eventually that's why they said many girls were molested by older men in the past, and it was never seen as anything wrong at the time.
I think that also touches on the need to seriously to question conventions, group conventions, because that's something that was anyway everyone conformed to in that particular group or time frame of that group, and now some of those elements still persist today. Like
Yeah,
you
they
just mentioned,
they still persist today. Many people now, if you were to ask if something like that was to happen to your child, you go to the deep rural areas and a child has been raped, and you ask them, how do you handle that? Many a times you won't find police involved. They will talk about it as families, and the funny part is they will even say there's a fine that they will say this perpetrator must pay, and that whole thing is forgotten about. And you go to urban areas, if you touch my child inappropriately, it's going to be a big thing. No, we're going to go to court. And I think we're influenced by where we are geographically and the group that we interact with, because I remember one of the students when we were doing that a case study on that, and she said, but if you're quick to go and report this person, do you think about what will happen in future in that child's life? She's going to continue to stay with those people. Probably the perpetrator will be arrested, but if it's an uncle, she's staying with the grandmother and the mother. The grandmother is angry that my son has been arrested because of my daughter's child. Or it puts the grandmother in a very difficult situation. You understand?
Yeah, I think that sort of paints that picture of, a certain, what's trauma to someone else cannot be trauma to
the next person.
Or rather, but to take it, to bring it a little bit closer to this context, you and I could both experience an event, and you could take it as traumatic, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
So with that idea in mind, how do you think the children of the villagers, the affected children who have been molested, how do they deal with this on a psychological level? On a psychological level, is it as traumatic to them as it would be for a person in the urban areas, or are they not affected in that way?
It is more on an individual basis, because of the other factors that will also play part there: your biological makeup, your psychological strength, and the support that you receive. So there are so many things that can really lead to somebody saying it's traumatic for somebody and it's not traumatic for somebody. And if you remember, in the olden days, if you go and report that you were raped or molested or you were touched inappropriately sexually, they will look at your emotional response. Like, if you're not crying, if you don't look like you are traumatized, they will say, no, maybe it was consented, because you don't look like you are so traumatized. But we know there are people who, they're not good at showing their emotions to other people, and it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It might hurt more than somebody who's crying, who's making all kinds of things there that convince everybody that this person was raped. So it depends on our psychological makeup as well, the biological makeup and the social makeup as well. How I'm going to react to it, and also the other thing that is also critical is if a child comes home and say, I was touched inappropriately or somebody did this to me, and as a mother, or the first person that the child's gonna confide in, I believe them at the first instance, it makes a huge difference. And many a times, adults are doubtful. So they will ask questions like, are you sure? Immediately you ask that question, are you sure this happened? The child might react differently and say, no, I was just joking. Or they might lose it completely. Why are you doubting me that I can come and lie about something as serious as that? So that's why I'm saying social support also plays a role there as well.
Wow, that form of trauma is very complex, and like you just mentioned here, the context can play a role in some of the things that we see, dynamics that we see unfolding in society at large. The GBV prevalence in South Africa and all of that.
And also, what I wanted to add was, some kids, even being exposed to trauma like that, their minds or the brain can protect them from the traumatic reaction to that. And some, the brain hides that information, or the mind hides that information away. It's not accessible. But as they grow older and they start now to encounter sex, those things comes back. So you find many children who, after they've been raped, it looks like it didn't affect them that much. But see them when they become adolescents or teenagers and they now have boyfriends, or even some when they're older women and they're expected to have sex, and the trauma comes back and it starts to trouble them, some to a point where they will say, I don't want to do this because of their past experiences that they have.
Yeah, which is why I think empathy is so important towards everyone,
Everyone who,
because you never know why a person acts in a particular way. This is not to justify the aggression of others, but a bit of empathy I have found goes a long way in your own. Empathy can be selfish,
yeah.
Being able to empathize with other people does bring you at peace to a certain extent. So I think for the audience, we should walk through life with an understanding that people are dealing with some deep-seated traumas that are suppressed, some in many cases.
In their minds, yes.
How might shared trauma experiences, such as those stemming from historical injustices or community violence, things like apartheid, colonialism, and all the trauma that comes there, how might this impact group dynamics and social cohesion within a community like Vembe?
I'm not a politically minded person as such, but the trauma, the shared traumas that, especially of the past regime, what I see now is, people who actually experience maybe who had firsthand experience of those situations. What you see now, it's hard for many people to let it go, to let it be the past that belongs in the past. So you find that what I see happening is many people who were victims or who have experienced those situations and traumas in the past, because they can't let go, they kind of want to pass it to the next generation. So I had a friend who said to me something that I felt, okay, I don't believe things the way you do, or I don't see things the way you do. And I had to go back and ask, did you experience this yourself? Says, no, but my grandfather. So you see, the grandfather has passed that down to the father, who has passed it down to her. She's probably going to pass it down to her children as well. So even if we say we're living in a democracy, we're not really there yet because of that. Some people can't let. If I say go watch the Sarafina movie, even kids who are growing up now, who know nothing about what happened back then, they start to have a change of attitude and mind about things because of what they see. They think that was not right, and they want to continue to be angry about it.
Wow. I think, that really covers the part on trauma that we wanted to discuss there. So now just to go into groups at large, because they were talking about how shared trauma experiences affect the group at large. And you indicated that there's a generational pass on of trauma, generational trauma, as some people may call it. So now I just want us to focus on groups and how they fulfill our sense of belonging, psychological need for that. But what happens to an individual when they enter a group?
Okay, when I was teaching this with my second year students, and I asked them, what is a group? So Some were saying, okay, a group, it's many people together, maybe a group of 5 or so. And I asked, would you call 2 people a group? Would you say 2 people are a group? I said, no, 2 people cannot be a group. It's a couple. So a group is anything more than one. So even 2 people can be a part of group. So when you become part of a group, whether it's a big group or a small group, people de-individuate in a group situation. They lose themselves. They start to think like others. If I say, let's go to Naval Hill, and you want to go to the mall, I can influence you to do what I want you to do. And you end up doing what I want to do, not because you want to, but because if you say, no, go to Naval Hill or go to the mall, you might lose that friendship, or you might lose your membership in that group. So people end up doing what, especially the group leader, if it's a very influential person, people end up doing what the group leader says. So if they have to make a decision, they'll first want to hear, what does the group leader say about this? The decision of, if we think of people on weekends, if you have to go somewhere, you will wait for the person who is in a position of a leadership in that group to decide, this is what we're going to do. And people in the group, even if they're not happy with the decisions, they will end up doing that, even if they personally don't want to, but because you're part of the group, you end up doing what the group is going to do.
I think that's a very deep statement. And for the audience's benefit here, groups are a fundamental part of social life.
Yes.
And in the old days, when our ancestors were hunting, they needed to form groups and social groups in order to survive, because the tribe had more power as a unified whole than as any individual. And viral emotions can spread through groups, things like fear, anger, whatnot. And like you highlighted, the desire to go somewhere else. I want to go somewhere else, and another person wants to go somewhere else. So in the old days, now very older days, it was very helpful for us to feel anxiety as a whole. Because if a person feels anxiety and another person in the group feels it, and then it becomes a viral emotion, we can get away from prey faster. We can get away from predators faster and not become victim to that. But that in the modern world, that compulsion for groups, for security and belonging still exists. However, it can expose us to more harmful viral effects, such as the ones that are espoused by politicians, for example, and how they can be divisive. And like you said, when you're part of a group, sort of your individuality becomes chipped away. And when we enter these groups, political organizations, whatnot, even our individuality becomes stripped away.
Yeah.
Please tell us, how do individuals' sense of identity influence their interactions within groups, particularly if those groups are associated with social or political movements?
Ideally, it should, like you said, groups were very functional, helpful. They still are. It's a good thing to belong to a group. It could be a church group, it could be a political group, it could be any group that, and ideally groups were supposed to work better than an individual. But then the problem comes where, if the individuals in that group, there's, like you said, if we're talking about group members influencing each other's emotions or emotional state, like if we're walking and I start to feel anxious, that anxiety can become viral in that group, and we can sometimes do things that will save us. Sometimes we can do things that can get us into trouble. If one person has a negative thoughts or negative attitude or negative feelings, it can also affect the other group members. So in terms of individual functioning inside the group, I think the group needs to be, the individual members of the group should be able to retain some of their individuation or the individual functioning inside in that group. Maybe then that group can function much better.
And like you're saying, you know, in social and political movements, especially where these group standards are enforced, ideas are enforced heavily, and like you said, if you disagree to go to Naval Hill, you risk ostracization and being excluded from the group and whatnot. And people form tribes, political tribes and social tribes, and anyone that is an outsider or who disagrees with their political view or social stance is seen as the enemy to the group, the other.
Yeah, the other. And it's unfortunate that with political groups, for instance, there are things that they can agree on or they believe in certain things, and you come in as an individual in that group and you don't see things the same way. At times, people in a group setting, they decide to keep quiet because they don't want to be ostracized. And some of them, because they don't want to be seen as others, they just go with the flow and say, as long as it was not me, or as long as I did not say, yes, I agree to it. But when I teach that group thinking class, I said to them, if you walk out of class and you find the students singing and you don't know where they're going, and you're thinking, if I don't go with them, then they will think I'm opposing them. They might start to attack me. You join the group, and the next thing, there's a building burning. You did not even see who started the fire, from where the fire started. But by being part of that group, if they're going to come and arrest people, you're going to be arrested with them. You cannot say, but no, I just followed them. I didn't know where they were going. You're part of that group. You know, that is the negative side of groups. That when many people call it mob psychology, people go and do destructive things. And you were part of the group. You did not make a decision, or even when the decision to burn the building was taken, you were not even there. But because you joined them, because they were chanting, you become part of it. You're associated with them.
I think you're highlighting a very pertinent point there about conformity and how we tend to conform to groups in the midst of even things that may conflict with our personal values, just so that we stay within that group setting. And part of doing that, I mean, I think part of that is because the other is seen as the enemy, right?
Yeah.
And even some of the negative qualities of the other are exaggerated, and the positive ones are suppressed, if not eradicated altogether. And they are seen as this villain, and they are villainized. What are some of the psychological mechanisms that allow individuals within groups to dehumanize and stereotype members of outgroups?
You know, I think it's more of a tendency to think that if you're not part of us, you're an enemy. You know, if you're not part of us, you are an enemy. So whatever negative things, you deserve it. You know, if you look, I remember giving an example that where at the school where my children did their primary school, they would have different color codes in that school. So they had a red group, the blue group, and the green group. So when they participate in athletics, they will be red group and the blue group, and I think the red called themselves fire, the blue one called themselves water, and the green called themselves earth. As young as they were, you know, if the overall top performer in that athletics comes from one of this group, And you sit there, you watch the way they will be singing and celebrating and things that they will be doing to other groups. And you say, oh, they learn this from as young as that you are not green, you are not one of us. So they can call you names, they can do all kinds of negative things to you. And it's so funny. You ask yourself, there are families where somebody is a Kaizer Chiefs fan, the other one is a Paris fan, and then there's a match. After the match, of course, one team probably wins, the other one. And you see what people do in the stadium, the other group doing things to the other group. And you ask yourself, if your brothers, you're coming from the same family, and in the stadium, that's what you're doing. What happens when you go home? Are you going to be friends when you go home? And it's things like those that when you're not part of us, you become an enemy. So whatever the enemy deserves, you deserve it. So somehow people in their minds are convinced that's if you're not part of us, then you're an enemy.
Yeah, and I think that also goes to that thing we mentioned earlier about viral emotions and how certainty can become a viral emotion to the point where where you might have questioned this particular course of action or demonization or dehumanization of the group alone. When you are in the group setting and those ideas are being spread throughout the group, you are more prone to be certain. You experience a high level of certainty because, wow, everyone else around me is doing it, so it must be right.
And also because we're thinking, if it's the whole group doing it, it means it's right. I remember when my child was doing grade 3, came back, Mom, I need to cut my hair like this. And I said, no, you're not going to cut your hair like that. I said, why? And, no, I don't want you to cut your hair like that. But everybody else is cutting their hair like that. So I said to her, if everybody goes to a bridge now and they say they want to throw themselves in the river, are you going to throw yourself in the river as well? No. So you see now, you're not going to do everything that the group is doing because not everything that the group is doing is right. I think it needs us as individuals to still want to be an individual, even though you are in a group, and say, I want to be responsible for the decisions that I make. I want to be responsible for the things that I do, even in when I'm part of the group. If the group says, this is wrong and this is the punishment that goes with that wrongdoing that the person has done. If you look at xenophobic attacks, people will think, okay, the people, foreigners are not supposed to be here because as that person, as an individual, has got issues with the foreigners, and come and convince all of us that we need to go burn their shops, we need to go attack them. And as a person, you feel this is wrong. I don't want to do it. I think we should be able, as individuals, remain with our own individual beliefs, even though we're part of the group, and not allow ourselves to be influenced. Because when you're part of the group, it feels right. But when you're alone, does it still feel right? If it was not your decision. If I'm sitting alone and I'm thinking, if you look at the violence that is perpetuated towards our LGBTQI communities, and people say, it's because it's wrong. It's wrong to be thinking or to be living or to believe whatever they see, and they decide to all those girls who says they don't want to be involved with male counterparts who are going to rape them, to teach them a lesson. When you're sitting alone, does it feel right to say, I'm taking the responsibility to be the one who punished this person for that? Does it feel right? Or it feels right when you are in a group? When you are alone, it doesn't feel right.
I think what you're highlighting there is whether indirectly or directly, is the ability of certain aggressive people who are more prone to aggressive, because I think we're all aggressive in some sense, but it exists on a spectrum, and some people are even have less of a conscience when committing acts of aggression than others, you know. So in a group setting, these hyper-aggressive people are able to take advantage of the viral emotions and let's rape people who are homosexual or other or bisexual, and things like that. Or let's say black people are inferior, and you know, the leaders at the helm of that are the ultra aggressive ones, and they're able to sort of trickle down this thing and even create groups. They are so aware of the power of groups that they even went to create groups in terms of like the Group Areas Act. And you know, you mentioned the xenophobic attacks, which is more of a national thing, where it's black, white, Indian, or everyone is involved in saying that foreigners are the other. Whereas in South Africa, during the apartheid thing and everything, where those categories were created, it was more of a racial thing, right? So the leaders that were at the helm of that affected these groups. And I feel like it's very important to point out that, you know, the truth is objective.
Yeah.
And our interpretations can be subjective. But in the group of, you know, white Afrikaners, for example, or, you know, English speakers who are the beneficiaries of that apartheid system, they were also in a group.
Yeah.
And for them to speak out and be like, no, you know, black people are actually okay, or let's stop this system, whatever, they were gonna get ostracized.
Yeah, yeah.
And they had their own individual pressures, and you know, they were affected by the group in the same way that anyone can be affected by the group.
Yeah.
Not to make excuses, but to bring into perspective the human element there that is universal towards everyone.
Everyone, yeah.
And how hyper aggressive people can be held accountable. But that's the thing with what you said earlier on, with the fact that if you see students now singing and then now the building is burning, everyone is going to be, you know, corralled. Everyone is going to be held responsible for that. But in many cases, it was that hyper aggressive person that burned that building, you know, and it was that hyper racist person who instilled this system and began that group.
Yeah.
So now when people look back at it, it's almost like now all white people are bad, or and that's not necessarily the case.
That is not necessarily
That's
true.
not necessarily the case, but because of that group accountability, like, okay, now you all burned the building, you're all going to jail. A lot of people are saying now all white people are responsible for this particular thing, and I think that's something in society that's not addressed enough, and it's more of we're playing a blame game. But what's necessary is, you know, a higher level of cooperation, take accountability, and then realize that the real group is the country, first of all. But there's an even bigger one, which is the whole human race, you know, and that's the group that we essentially belong to as human, as people. That's the reality group. And in order for us to survive, we need to cooperate amongst each other on a higher level.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's where the critical thinking comes in. Are you able to critically think before you make a decision, before you utter a statement? If you look at we have serious problems in schools with bullying, and you ask yourself, okay, you are a guy or a boy, and you see there's this boy who looks hyper aggressive, who looks like he's the king here in class or in the school. And if I don't want him to do what he's doing to others, I need to look like I'm part of what he's doing. And everybody, when they're running away from being victimized by this person, they become the bullies. They go and join forces with this person. But as individuals, they're not thinking enough to say, is this what I stand for? Is this what I believe? That you must just victimize people unnecessarily. And I think, you know, at times, that's why we call it social ills. The society is sick, and it perpetuates generation over generation, because there's nobody who says the difference will come if we start standing as individuals against all these wrong things that are happening and say, as an individual, I cannot do that. As an individual, I cannot do that. But because I'll see somebody doing it and say, I want to go and be part of that person, maybe because I'm protecting myself or because it's exciting. There are people who are not actively aggressive, but passively they are aggressive. So they won't start hitting you or being aggressive actively towards a person, but they get excited when somebody does it. Like it feels like it's an extension. Somebody's doing something that I don't have the strength to do it. I want somebody to do it on my behalf, and it excites me when it's somebody else doing it. So there are people who are like that, who join the groups and they like the fact that the group leader is doing things that I would want to do, but I can't. But then he's doing it. It's as if I'm also doing it. Yeah.
So groups like can sort of be an extension of our own thinking, and it's like in bees sort of have a high level of coordination where if someone attacks, they have this hive mind where they almost think alike.
Yeah.
So in groups we become hive mind, part of this hive mind, and in highlighting that human aspect, would you say that anyone is immune, like naturally immune, without of course using these tools that you've mentioned of critical thinking and thinking about your individuality within groups? Do those skills come to anyone naturally?
They don't come naturally. They don't come naturally. Otherwise, if they came naturally, we probably would be living in a better world. I think it's a lot of work, individual work, that somebody needs to do. We do have people who, I will say, because of their character and personality, they might look like they're immune. They're our introverts, people who want to be on their own by themselves. They don't want to be part of the group. They're happy when they're alone. Those ones are safer, from all these group things, because they don't prefer to go to where the extroverts prefers to be. And if they are going to do something, they will be accountable alone, because they will do it alone. They never will say, come join forces with me. They will do it when they are alone. But our extroverts are the ones who are vulnerable to group thinking, group action, group things, because they like groups. And say you go out, say I just want to go be with my friends out there, and you're there, they say, no, look at that girl, that girl, she's like this, she's like this. Hey, I really want to have her. And there's a very sad story that happened to this girl. She was gang raped, and whoever wanted to rape her didn't want to do it alone. So he had to get the gang to come and rape him. So to rape the girl. So I think there were 5 boys. The 4 raped her. Then this last one said, it doesn't feel right. I cannot. And they say, you're going to do it, because if you don't, you're going to turn us in the police. You're going to be a state witness, and we don't want that. It's either we kill the girl or we kill you. And he said, I'm willing, kill me, save her.
Wow.
An individual who says, I'm not going to be influenced to do the wrong things because I'm part of the group. We want many people like that, who says, no, this is wrong, and I can't do it.
It's that thing of that we touched on earlier about how hyper-aggressive people, or people who are more prone to aggression on the spectrum, as I need to highlight, a lot of the time people, what we tend to do, the tendency is to say you're aggressive, but I'm not aggressive, or you're affected by the group, but I'm not affected by the group. So it's always someone else. Even a person might even hear some of this information, be like, wow, this is so deep. And they might even feel it in their bones, but they would never be able to acknowledge that, this is actually me. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I feel that, again, critical thinking again is a learned thing. It's not a natural thing which we have.
Naturally,
Yeah.
And also a sense of accountability. The students laughed at me when I told them, when you think about it, and if you go back to the fees must fall, You are at Univen and you hear UJ students have banned, they've done this, they said fees must fall. It will take courage, somebody who really wants to do that, to start mobilize another group at another university, another group at another university. And we quickly to say it's spirits, spiritual things and people, there's a spiritual thing but it's more like somebody looking at it and say, why can't I do it? If I get 1, 2, 3, 4 people, we can start this. That's why there are people who are arrested. Because there's somebody who started that. Understand?
Yeah.
Somebody who's probably very, very aggressive. Or probably was traumatized as well.
Yeah.
So many reasons that could lead to that. But if you take time, you look at group actions, things that people do, aggressive things that people do in groups, and you want to pick the person who started this, it's never two people who start. Somebody came up with that idea and sell it to the other person who bought it and sell it to others who bought it and they ran with it.
Yeah. I think that again here it's a point to highlight that even though the aggressors at points may be harmful, at times it's a very positive thing. It's like aggression, like many things, is many-sided and it's multifaceted. It's not something to be purely negative, because some of the aggressors are the people who, lead positive things as well, in addition to negative. So there are two sides to that coin. So Dr. Ramarumo, we're almost coming to a close here, and I want us to, sort of touch on social media a bit and the groups there, the group dynamics in social media virtually. How does the fast-paced and often emotionally charged nature of social media interactions affect individuals' ability to manage stress and regulate emotions in their offline lives?
You said how?
How does the fast-paced, and often emotionally charged nature of social media groups, how does that affect an individual's ability to manage their stress and regulate their emotions in real life?
A lot of people can't separate their social media life and their real life. So for many people, there are no boundaries. They live the social media. I always say to people, it's unreal world, because their friends on Facebook are not your friends really, but they're your friends. So if you can't separate that social media life and your real life, you are bound to allow things to move from there to come to the other side, things move from here to the other side. And that for many people, I think it's very, very frustrating. If you look at the influence of now, people are doing things that they cannot even afford because of the social media. They want to be seen as. And when they are alone, they don't allow that moment to say, but can I really afford this? Can I really afford this? Or I'm getting myself into deep financial problems because I want to look like I afford and I don't. So it needs like somebody who is aware that the social media life, it's the funny part of our lives, that probably it's the fantasy, but there is a reality that when I come back and I'm alone, I'm offline, I need to live my real life, not to live the social media life.
And not to live the life of the tribe that I identify with on social media, because tribes are also groupings, right? So I think you can use the word tribe and group. A group is a tribe is a particular form of a group.
A group, yeah.
And the tribes that we identify with on social media and those groups are not, we shouldn't, try too hard to conform, because we talk that we have a deep need to conform in order to belong and everything.
And also, I think we have a theory in psychology that talks about we do need to be our own individuals, but we also acknowledge that we need others. And to understand that I need to be an individual in certain situations, I need to be the other person, or a friend, a mother, a husband, wife, or lecturer like me, or colleague. or something. But when I'm alone, I'm not all those things. And there are people who are unable to separate themselves from the group. They can't be themselves. They don't exist as individuals because their existence is always part of the group. They can be part of this group or part of that or part of that. But when you are able to know who you are, understand yourself as an individual, when you are alone, I think that helps a lot to be able to overcome all these other pressures that are not necessary, you know. A lot of people in groups, they suffer emotionally because they want to prove to a point to the group that I'm part of. I conform to this group.
Yeah, I think what you're highlighting is that, you know, the skill of critical thinking within a group is powerful, and it's become even more powerful these days, where we're constantly being inundated with, you know, social media stimulus, and we're constantly thinking about that. Dr. Ramarumo, we're about to have some dramas in here. I'm sure you saw some people coming in now. It's about to get very loud in here. So, but this was indeed the point where we wanted to wrap it up. So I just want to thank you very much for joining us here in the Social Justice Lab today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mzansi, for joining us and speaking about some of the things with Dr. Mpho. It may seem like, you know, Dr. Ramarumo and I discussed a lot of things, and it may seem like even the Social Justice Lab, it's about a lot of things. But, you know, we assure you, it's just society.